Matthew Holt. I'm at the World Healthcare Congress, and I'm with David Wennberg. David is the Chief Scientist at Health Dialogue, which is I'll show you their sign as they paid for it nicely. There you go. Look at that. Your marketing folks will be proud, David. Health Dialogue is a lot better than most of the large disease management company now owned by the Brits, Bupa, and also closely connected for the Foundation for Informed Medical Decision Making, or
Also
FIMDIM.
correct, yep.
Also correct, which David's part of. And David has I won't say much, but has a very famous family name in the business of shared decision making. And if you want to go to the BMJ site, you can vote for one of his relatives.
Please do vote frequently and often.
I've already put it on the blog for Jack Wennberger's Lifetime Achievement Award from the BMJ. We're looking forward to that. And anyway, so let's just start quickly at the sort of the top, David.
Sure.
Health Dialogue does disease management. Couple of minutes. What does that mean?
Sure. Well, I'm going to tell you what we think about as disease management. So when we think about disease management, we're actually thinking about total population management. And what I mean really from that is from the wellness to essentially end of life, although, as you know, we don't talk very much about end of life anymore.
Well, that's a whole other can of worms we can open in a second, but yes.
And the way we approach it is really in two different areas. The first one is we have really hardcore analytics underneath that. And what I mean by the analytics underneath that is that we take total populations, multiple data sources, and try to identify individuals who are at risk for what we would call unwarranted variation. Overuse of hospital and specialist services, underuse of quality and effective care, and then what we would call misuse of shared decision making, which I think you're going to ask more questions about that specific concept. So the first piece is to use the data, and we use a whole variety of data sources, everything from claims to HRAs to third-party purchasing data from Experian. And we assemble these data at the patient level, and we identify individuals who look like they need help in navigating the healthcare system. The second piece is a very innovative outreach strategy to get people engaged, because if you can't engage them, you can't have behavior change. And the last piece on top, if you will, is the behavior change model, which really has two specific pieces. One is what I would call care navigation and behavior change models, and the other one is this concept of shared decision making, which is really about getting patients actively involved in decision making.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
Data analytics, I think people are relatively familiar with now the concept of, putting all the different data sources together, identifying the sick people. We had some charts, George Halverson was showing some charts yesterday about the 6-10% equating for, I think it was, whatever, a large chunk of this 80% of care, and then, sick as 1% for 30% of care, and managing those folks well. There's been a lot of criticism of disease management in terms of how it does the outreach and how effective the outreach has been. What are you guys doing, and what's different from when the CBO was saying saying that it didn't work a while back?
Let's start specifically with the outcomes, I think. And as you may know, we actually published a large study in the New England Journal in September. It was the largest randomized trial of care management to date.
And this was done in Pittsburgh, right?
It was actually done with 2 of our large clients who have asked us not to identify them, and 7 employers within those client bases. So it was everything from state employees, university systems, steel manufacturers, and financial services companies, so a broad range of employer type group. 180,000, 185,000 people split into 2 different groups. One got what I would call innovative and a substantive care management. The other one got sort of a light touch. And because it was a randomized trial, the nice part about it is you could definitively ask the question is, does it work? Right. And the answer was, for the first time, I think, we showed a really substantial improvement in quality, reductions in unnecessary hospitalizations, and a big change in the cost between the 2 groups, to the tune of a 10% total population reductions in admissions and over 3.5% reductions in total costs.
And in that group, what was the type of outreach, and what is aggressive intervention?
Sure. So I think here really were 3 things, I think, Matthew, that we did. The first one is what I would call more traditional care management. We focus a lot on that 10% that drives 80% of cost, the chronic failure, a chronic disease population, and really identified those that are essentially emerging into risk. Not the highest group, that's the paradox. Telephonic care support probably doesn't work for the top 0.5%. It's really the next level down. The second group we focused on is this group which we say are for shared decision making. So they're people who are facing choices around elective surgery, hip replacement, knee replacement, back surgery, chronic stable angina. And we actively engage them through both interactive voice recognition, live calls, mails, and emails to get it involved in shared decision making. And the last group, which I think is a new area that no one's even thought about to date, is this what I would call emerging risk group. We call them other high-risk group, and they're people without chronic disease that we could identify, without a shared decision-making piece, but looked like they had real problems in navigating the system. So they were people who had 3 specialist visits with 3 different diagnoses in a couple weeks,
right,
or a couple emergency room visits with different diagnoses, and they just couldn't figure out how to get from point A to point B. And they used the same type of outreach strategies, and then really taught them how to be better navigators.
So is the main intervention that you use telephonic for that whole group, or is it a mix of sort
It's
of
a mix. So it's telephonic. We do have web-based products,
yep,
particularly shared decision-making tools, which
right,
I think are very interesting to, which we call Crossroads. And the last part is a variety of print and other types of media.
So a multiple strategy to get to
Yeah.
them. So you're saying that's now working. Let's talk for a minute about the top, what, 0.5% or whatever is the,
Yeah,
the chronic care piece. So there have been a couple of now worksite-based clinics. You've read the New England Journal of Medicine article, and everyone else has, about the role of sort of coaching amongst the chronically,
yeah,
the severely chronically ill. You said that standard telephonic stuff may not work for that group. So what do you think does work,
yeah,
and how are you going about
so
it?
I think, let me be clear about what I think. That top 0.5% are the group that, I would not call them the advanced chronically ill. I would say that those are groups that are bouncing basically between the hospital, intermediate health care services, and back and forth between those, right, two. And that group is an area I think that needs probably much more intensive interventions, combining clinical interventions on the ground with other support. And then the other part that I think is really important is good management of benefit structures too for that side. So it's not a simple navigation, because these guys are just too sick to boot. It's not a navigation issue anymore. It's right, just they're just too sick.
Let's talk a minute then about the relationship. I'll get the shared decision making, sure, in a second, but the relationship between the disease management company and the physicians and providers, because, sure, that's always been a sense of controversy, and I think a lot of the issues with the original studies and the reason that there was the failure with the Medicare pilots was because that wasn't right, managed well. How are you dealing with that issue, and what's different now?
Good question. So let me say the paradox here, and it's what's really interesting, is that people think about the MHS study, which is the one you're talking about. Actually, Medicare has done many more trials with providers in care, right, management, which actually have also found the same thing. No results.
Some of them have been more successful, the prepaid group stuff. But
you know what?
You're not agreeing.
Well, actually, if you look at the summary paper that was done in JAMA, none of them actually could show that they saved money.
Right.
And that was a summary tape of about 20 different studies. So for me, the future here isn't one or the other. It's actually the combination.
Yep.
So what I'm really excited about in sort of this new models of whether it's accountable care organizations, patient-centered medical homes, this new way where physicians and other providers are going to be held more accountable for population health management, I actually think the future portends, if you will, a hybrid model, which is not outside of the docs, not only within the docs, but a combination of face-to-face and other types of support around it. Coming back to the question you had about the top 0.5%, I could see a future where the top 0.5% is primarily dealt with by the primary care physician and the specialist working on that with that physician, and then the next level down by ancillary office staff in there, supported with technology and stratification tools, and then the next group, which is a really large group, with wraparound telephonic support around that. But I think the key to the success in that model is, if you will, and I'm biased about this, but also because we've done it before with a couple really interesting provider groups, is a very clear analytic strategy that segments that population. Say, okay, Matthew, here is the group that you should focus on. Here, Dr. Wennberg is a group you should focus on. And here is the coaches group that they should focus on. But the rules are explicit and transparent.
Yeah, and that actually does make a lot of sense, because I think my understanding is that most of the problem is, if you talk about patients who go to multiple specialists or whatever, there's an absence of information still for physicians, which is, even in the current EMR strategy, the basic use of a registry and understanding across different providers is a big problem.
It is. I mean, the irony of the EMR, if you will, in many ways, is that the EMR, for the most part, and I'll be careful because there are some new technologies out there, the EMR is, for the most part, is electronic manifestation of a paper record.
Yep.
And it has all the flaws and the benefits of that. But things like simple registries are really hard to create within an EMR. You need other things to do that. Plus, the EMR, even if it was perfect, only would know about care that's rendered within that doctor's office or the system. But we know a lot of care, and a lot of high-cost care occurs outside of the domain of the traditional care system from an EMR standpoint.
Right, exactly. So let's go to the reason you're here today, which is to talk about shared decision making. Obviously, the Dartmouth folks and your father and others have been involved in this for many years. And the basic lesson of all that research is that if you give patients the choice, they're likely to be less aggressive about what happens than their physicians. I think is the basic message. So now you're wrapping this up and putting it on a mass scale.
Yeah.
How's it working, and what's the blowback from the provider community?
Yeah. Well, the blowback from the so first of all, I mean, part of that shared decision, part of the care management randomized trial that we did was a big focus on shared decision making, and of that 10% of hospitalization reduction. It really came out of two categories. It was medical admissions for people with chronic illnesses or emerging risk, and then the other big group was this shared decision-making surgeries.
The reduction as well.
Exactly. And I think you characterize, I am actually a little bit more pithy when I think about this. Actually, I say patients are more risk-averse than the average physician is. Right. And so what we found is that if you give patients objective information in a way that they can understand it, that lays out choices, risks and benefits, and this process of shared decision making, which elicits patients' preferences and values for both the risks and the benefits, they can come to a decision which is in concert with their preferences and values. We can scale it. We showed that in the randomized trial. The part I'm really excited about in some of with the new regulations, even though I'm not necessarily a great fan of regulations, but in the ACO regulations, shared decision making was referenced explicitly over half a dozen times as a key component of one of the triple aims. And so I think the stage now is set. The blowback from physicians, which you also asked about, I'd say it's becoming less and less so. And part of it is the strategy. I mean, if you look at the decision aids that we've created, there are some of the internationally recognized physicians are part of the group that's helping put this together. So the first thing is to recognize that this is full evidence-based transparency. The second part, I think, is that physicians are starting to realize that getting patients involved in decision-making is really important, and that by and large, they don't always have the best skills to do so. And so having the support around them to do that, I think, is really important. And I think the future, this comes back to the hybrid model, I think that the future is for shared decision-making to be done a lot in the primary care setting, because that's where the rubber meets the road, if you will. But we need to help support primary care physicians if they are going to do that successfully.
Great. I've been talking with David Wennberg. He's the Chief Science Officer of Health Dialogue. David, thanks for your comments this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Matthew.